They took a boy's backpack without asking, not knowing it held a $100,000 artificial heart keeping him alive. Gregory Lawson, from the HOA, called it unauthorized clutter, enforcing rules with zero humanity and no remorse. But his mother, Claire Sanders, didn't stay silent. She turned heartbreak into a battle that shook the system to its core. And you won't believe the twist this fight for justice took, and how, in the end, justice didn't just knock, it broke the door down. Claire Sanders didn't expect anything unusual at 6:14 that morning. The sun was still just a haze behind the trees, and the neighborhood was wrapped in its usual suburban stillness. Trimmed lawns, sleepy sprinklers ticking away, and the distant hum of a garbage truck. The knock was sharp, precise, like it had purpose. Claire, still in her robe, padded barefoot across the hardwood floor and opened the front door, yawning as she turned the handle. On her porch stood a man in a high-visibility HOA vest, clipboard in one hand, something blue and familiar dangling from the other. Her son's backpack. It was Logan's, the bright blue one, with the fading Star Wars patch stitched over a front pocket. But now it looked wrong, like it didn't belong to a child anymore. It hung lifelessly from the man's grip, limp like a thing discarded. "We've removed an unauthorized item left in the common area," the man said without looking her in the eyes. His voice was flat, bureaucratic, as if he were reading off a parking ticket. Section 4, 3.1. No personal belongings unattended in shared space. And with that, he turned and walked down the steps without waiting for a response. Claire blinked. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then her gaze dropped back to the bag in her hands, and she felt the floor beneath her vanish. The bag had been charging. The portable unit. Inside, connected to the wireless dock system, was Logan's external controller, the lifeline for the $100,000 artificial heart, keeping her 11-year-old son alive while he slept. The air left her lungs. Her knees buckled, and the backpack nearly slipped from her fingers. She didn't scream, not yet. Instead, her body reacted before her brain could. She turned and bolted down the hall toward Logan's room, shouting his name. "Logan!" No response. The beeping hit her ears first, sharp, rhythmic, escalating. By the time she flung the door open, the monitor on his nightstand was flashing red. A soft, computerized voice repeated over and over. "Power fault detected. Battery at 11%. Logan was pale. His lips were tinged with blue, his chest rising in short, weak breaths. He hadn't woken up yet. He didn't even know he was dying. This wasn't a rule violation. This wasn't clutter left outside. This was her son's heart. And someone had ripped it from him. Without asking, without warning, without even caring what it was, Claire grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Her voice cracked as she dialed 911, already fumbling with the straps of the bag to pull out the unit, praying it hadn't been damaged. Outside, the morning continued as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped, sprinklers turned lazily, and the man in the HOA vest walked back to his white pickup, tapping notes into his tablet. But inside the Sanders home, time had collapsed into panic. And a mother realized her son had been sentenced by someone who never even bothered to ask his name. Claire didn't remember how her feet carried her down the hallway, only the sound of her own heartbeat crashing in her ears. Faster than her thoughts, faster than her breath. She slammed open the Logan's door. The lights were still dim, a soft glow from the nightlight in the corner, but the red flash from the monitor bathed the room in pulsing urgency. Red. Red, red. It was screaming silently. The screen above his bed read, "Critical power fault. Backup mode engaged. Remaining battery. 4 minutes." Logan lay on his back, unmoving. His chest rose in shallow, uneven gasps. The color had drained from his face. His lips were twitching, like his body was trying to fight for air that wasn't coming fast enough. His arms, thin and covered in freckles, lay limp at his sides. The bandages from his last hospital visit were still on his wrists. The port on his chest blinked desperately, searching for a signal that wasn't there. The mobile controller, gone. Claire stumbled toward him, yanked the backpack open, and fumbled through the compartments, cables, cooling gel packs, the dock. It was all still there, but the unit's charge was depleted, cold to the touch. "No, no, no," she whispered. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She grabbed her phone and dialed with one hand, the other still pressing against Logan's forehead. 911, what's your emergency? My son's artificial heart, it's shutting down. I need an ambulance. Now, please. She couldn't hear the dispatcher's reply over the rising hum of the machine's emergency tone. 3 minutes. She knelt beside his bed, both hands on his cheeks now. Logan, baby, stay with me. You're okay. You're okay. They're coming. His eyes flickered, just a sliver. A whimper escaped his throat, barely audible, but it cut deeper than any scream. Claire couldn't stop the tears now, but there was no time to cry. The ambulance siren broke through the distant calm, faint but approaching. Claire ran to the door, flung it open, waving with both arms like a madwoman. 2 minutes. They burst into the room with equipment already unzipped, yelling in medical shorthand. Vitals? How long without charge? Where's the port? She pointed. Her voice had collapsed into sobs, but she still tried to speak. It was in his backpack. Someone took it. They took it. The EMTs worked fast, too fast to track. Wires, clamps, a manual stabilizer plugged into his chest. The monitor tone flattened into something steadier. Not safe, but survivable. For now. Logan was unconscious when they lifted him onto the stretcher. Claire climbed in after them, still holding his hand, still shaking. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the vehicle peeled off into the street, she finally let herself scream. It wasn't fear, it wasn't grief, it was rage. A helpless, primal scream at a world where a clipboard and a vest had more authority than a mother's warning or a child's life. Outside, the sky was brightening, but inside that ambulance, darkness clung to every second. At exactly 8:43 a.m., Gregory Lawson typed a short note into the digital logbook of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. Removed item, blue backpack. Location, community bench. Reason, violation of Visual Uniformity Standard, SEC 6 4.3. He clicked submit, sipped his coffee, and went back to reviewing complaints about garden gnomes and driveway chalk. He had no idea, or didn't care, what had just happened 2 blocks away. At the hospital, Claire sat on a plastic bench with bloodless knuckles and clenched fists. Logan was in surgery. The lead trauma surgeon, a woman with eyes that didn't blink, had told her the artificial heart's primary controller had lost contact with the internal node, forcing the team to cut him open and switch to an invasive emergency unit. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't supposed to happen. He's stable, they said, but this should have never been necessary. Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. The noise in her head was louder than anything outside it. 48 minutes later, she returned home. Logan's room still smelled like childhood. Strawberry shampoo, fresh sheets, Lego dust. But it felt hollow now, as if innocence itself had fled. She sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the thing that nearly killed him. The backpack, zipped, intact, confiscated like it was litter. Her eyes scanned the printed HOA handbook she'd left open on the counter days earlier. Page after page of regulations, outlined with the legal precision and robotic tone. She flipped to section 6, 4.3. Residents may not leave personal items unattended on communal benches, including but not limited to toys, backpacks, clothing, or food containers. Claire read the line again, and again, and again, until the words dissolved into static. Nowhere did it say, unless it's keeping a child alive. Later that day, a friend from the neighborhood texted a photo. Claire nearly dropped the phone. It was her front lawn, from across the street, a zoomed-in shot, her son's backpack, time-stamped 5:47 a.m. The HOA had taken a picture of it before removing it, cold, preemptive, calculated, like evidence before a crime. Claire drove to the HOA office, a sterile, windowless building tucked between a Starbucks and a gym. When the receptionist greeted her with a half-hearted, "Can I help you?" she didn't yell. She placed the backpack on the counter, gently, and then she said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, "You didn't take a backpack. You stole a beating heart, and you better believe someone's going to pay for it." By the next morning, the story had already escaped the quiet cul-de-sacs of Willow Ridge. What started as a furious Facebook post from Claire, raw, unfiltered, still typed with shaking fingers from the ER waiting room, turned into something viral. She hadn't planned to go public. She just wanted someone to understand the madness of what had happened. But people did more than understand. They erupted. My son almost died because a homeowners association thought his medical device was clutter. He was asleep inside our house while they ripped his backpack off a bench. That backpack held his heart, and now he's in surgery. This is real. This is what HOA rules did. The post reached 11,000 shares in 6 hours. By noon, it was trending. #Ho killed Logan. #backpack was his heart. This is attempted murder reporters started calling. Parent advocacy groups reposted the story. Even local lawmakers were retweeting it with words like disgusting, criminal, and reform now. Claire didn't sleep. Logan was sedated. Machines breathed for him. But the world outside his hospital room was breathing fire. Meanwhile, the Willow Ridge HOA board held an emergency meeting, not to apologize, but to manage optics. Gregory Lawson, still in his vest, spoke first. "We followed protocol. We have photos. The bag was left unattended for over 20 minutes. It was a violation." A woman across the table whispered, "That boy almost died." Gregory didn't flinch. "This isn't our fault," he said. "His mother should have kept medical equipment inside the home." Silence. The kind of silence that said, "You're not just wrong, you're dangerous." That evening, Claire stood on her front lawn, not alone. Neighbors gathered with candles. Friends brought blankets and folding chairs. Some had known Logan since he was born. Others had only seen him riding his scooter past their driveways, always smiling, always waving. Someone handed Claire a megaphone. She didn't want it at first, but then she looked at her house, her window glowing softly from the light of the machines keeping her son alive. She took a deep breath. "They saw a bag. I see a boy. They followed a rule. I followed his heartbeat. They call it enforcement. I call it attempted murder." No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence was louder than thunder. That night, the HOA's inbox received over 3,700 complaints. Claire's inbox, messages from mothers in Arizona, nurses in Georgia, veterans, pediatric surgeons, journalists, even a lawyer from Washington who offered free representation if this goes to court, and it should. It was no longer about HOA policy. It was about power without humanity. And it was clear. The storm had only just begun. The statement came at 10:07 the next morning. A PDF attachment, no signature, just a bland letterhead and a block of text from the Willow Ridge HOA. "We regret the recent incident involving a resident's child. While we sympathize with the family, the HOA acted within its authority as defined in the community guidelines. Our enforcement officer removed a personal item left unattended in a communal area as per standard protocol. We are conducting an internal review. No mention of the word heart. No mention of hospitalization, life support, or Logan. No apology. No accountability. Just procedure." Claire stared at the screen, expressionless. For a moment, it was like the world had frozen. Then she laughed, a short, empty sound. It wasn't funny, it was absurd. They still didn't get it, or worse, they did and just didn't care. An hour later, Claire sat in a makeup chair at the local NBC studio, about to go live on Good Morning Texas. Her phone buzzed non-stop in her lap, texts from friends, reporters, lawyers, even a producer from CNN. The anchor tried to smile gently as the countdown started in her earpiece. Claire didn't return it. The red light went on. "Claire Sanders, thank you for joining us today. They took my son's heart," she said flatly. The anchor blinked. "They call it a backpack, a violation, but it was an artificial heart, $100,000, life-saving, charging while he slept. They didn't ask, they didn't knock, they just took it. And now my son is in a hospital bed full of tubes because someone cared more about a neighborhood rule than about a child staying alive." The anchor sat in stunned silence. Claire leaned forward. "If I had left a pumpkin on my porch past Halloween, they'd find me. But they didn't find me. They nearly killed my son. And all they have to say is we regret the incident." That clip hit 6.1 million views in the first 24 hours. Lawyers began lining up, not just offering to defend Claire, but to launch a class action. Advocacy groups called it a landmark case in the making. And still, the HOA said nothing more. No retraction, no apology. But their silence was an answer, a loud, arrogant answer. Claire didn't stop. She met with the local council members. She gave interviews, wrote an op-ed for the Dallas Morning News. Every headline burned hotter. This HOA almost killed my son. Here's why I'm suing. Where policy replaces humanity. My son's heart was a rule violation. It was no longer just about Logan. It was about every family who had been punished for coloring outside the HOA's sterile, lifeless lines. And for the first time, the HOA had no control over the narrative. Because Claire wasn't asking for a seat at the table anymore, she had flipped the damn table over. The charges came down like thunder. At precisely 3:15 p.m. on a Friday, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office released a statement to the press. Gregory Lawson, enforcement officer for the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, and 3 HOA board members are being formally charged with criminal negligence resulting in great bodily harm. Additional charges include reckless endangerment and conspiracy to obstruct emergency medical devices. The state is treating this as an act of gross institutional misconduct with life-threatening consequences. The news broke live during Claire's interview with CBS this morning. The anchor's earpiece buzzed mid-question, and suddenly her face changed. Claire, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're just now receiving word. Charges have been filed against Lawson and the HOA board. Claire didn't speak. Her eyes glistened, her mouth slightly open, not from relief, not yet, but from something closer to stunned exhaustion, a storm that had finally cracked the sky. The next 48 hours were chaos for Willow Ridge. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Protesters returned, louder, angrier, carrying new signs. Accountability, not apathy. HOA God, charged, not sorry. Some residents cheered, others slammed their doors, but no one could pretend anymore. The HOA office closed temporarily for safety. Gregory Lawson's front yard was surrounded by media vans, and across the country, homeowners in other states began sharing their own stories. Claire's inbox was flooded again, this time with people begging her to go all the way. Don't settle, they wrote. Burn them down. But Claire wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted something that lasted. In a courtroom packed with reporters and residents, Claire sat quietly behind the prosecutor. Logan wasn't there. He was still healing, still fragile. But the judge allowed Claire to read a personal statement at the arraignment hearing. She stood. Her voice didn't shake. Not this time. When you took my son's backpack, you didn't see a heart monitor. You saw an unapproved item. You didn't see a little boy sleeping safely inside his home. You saw a rule to enforce, no questions asked. And when he stopped breathing, when his artificial heart began to fail because you took the very thing keeping him alive, you still didn't say you were sorry. You called it regret. I call it criminal. Even the judge lowered his gaze for a moment. Outside, someone had chalked words across the courthouse steps. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system, and the system got caught. And for the first time since Logan nearly died, Claire felt something shift. Not closure, not yet, but the start of a reckoning. The charges came down like thunder. At precisely 3:15 p.m. on a Friday, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office released a statement to the press. Gregory Lawson, enforcement officer for the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, and 3 HOA board members are being formally charged with criminal negligence, resulting in great bodily harm. Additional charges include reckless endangerment and conspiracy to obstruct emergency medical devices. The state is treating this as an act of gross institutional misconduct with life-threatening consequences. The news broke live during Claire's interview with CBS this morning. The anchor's earpiece buzzed mid-question, and suddenly her face changed. Claire, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're just now receiving word. Charges have been filed against Lawson and the HOA board. Claire didn't speak. Her eyes glistened, her mouth slightly open. Not from relief, not yet, but from something closer to stunned exhaustion, a storm that had finally cracked the sky. The next 48 hours were chaos for Willow Ridge. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Protesters returned, louder, angrier, carrying new signs. Accountability, not apathy. HOA God, charged, not sorry. Some residents cheered, others slammed their doors, but no one could pretend anymore. The HOA office closed, temporarily for safety. Gregory Lawson's front yard was surrounded by media vans, and across the country, homeowners in other states began sharing their own stories. Claire's inbox was flooded, again, this time with people begging her to go all the way. Don't settle, they wrote. Burn them down. But Claire wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted something that lasted. In a courtroom packed with reporters and residents, Claire sat quietly behind the prosecutor. Logan wasn't there. He was still healing, still fragile. But the judge allowed Claire to read a personal statement at the arraignment hearing. She stood. Her voice didn't shake. Not this time. When you took my son's backpack, you didn't see a heart monitor. You saw an unapproved item. You didn't see a little boy sleeping safely inside his home. You saw a rule to enforce, no questions asked. And when he stopped breathing, when his artificial heart began to fail because you took the very thing keeping him alive, you still didn't say you were sorry. You called it regret. I call it criminal. Even the judge lowered his gaze for a moment. Outside, someone had chalked words across the courthouse steps. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system, and the system got caught. And for the first time since Logan nearly died, Claire felt something shift. Not closure. Not yet, but the start of a reckoning. The trial began on a gray Monday morning. Outside the courthouse, people gathered. Not just neighbors, but strangers from other cities, even other states. Parents with children in wheelchairs. Families who had fought their own HOA battles. They held signs that read, "He deserved better." This is what happens when rules replace humanity. We are all Logan. Inside, it was standing room only. Claire sat in the front row, dressed in black. Her hands clutched a folded photo of Logan at 6 years old, smiling in the sun, hands gripping the handlebars of a scooter, artificial heart cables hidden under his shirt. She didn't look at Gregory Lawson, not once. Lawson sat with his lawyer, stiff, red-faced, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't acknowledge the crowd or Claire or anyone. He looked like a man trying to vanish into his own suit. The prosecution opened with a single image, the backpack, projected onto a courtroom screen, enlarged, almost surreal in its simplicity, the same bag that had once kept a child alive. This object, the prosecutor said, pointing, wasn't a toy, it wasn't trash, it wasn't a violation. It was a life support system, and these defendants treated it like litter. They laid out the timeline, the HOA's enforcement records, the early morning removal, the hospital intake reports, the emergency surgery, the reconstructed power logs from the heart's backup unit, showing the exact second it lost power. They called doctors, pediatric cardiologists, EMTs, engineers from the device manufacturer. Each testified to one undeniable fact. Removing that backpack put Logan's life at direct, immediate risk. Then came Claire. She stood alone, facing the jury. The courtroom was still, 1,000 breaths held. Logan was born with a heart defect. He's never known a day without a machine keeping him alive. But he's the happiest kid I know. He paints, he tells bad jokes. He wants to be a NASA engineer someday. That morning, he was sleeping, safely. I had placed the backpack on the bench just for a few minutes while I got his meds ready, and someone took it, without knocking, without asking, without checking. They didn't see a boy. They saw a violation. They took his heart and called it enforcement. One juror wiped tears from her eyes. Claire stepped down. She didn't look back. The defense tried to argue protocol, precedent, that Lawson couldn't have known what was inside, that there was no intent to harm. But the prosecutor held up the HOA manual in one hand and Logan's medical records in the other. There's a difference between making a mistake and choosing not to care. This wasn't negligence. This was willful blindness. And then, the moment that stopped the room, Logan testified. He walked slowly into the courtroom, one step at a time, escorted by a nurse. A small monitor blinked on his wrist. The surgical bandage on his chest was still fresh beneath his shirt. He took the stand and looked directly at Gregory Lawson. "You didn't even ask," he said, voice quiet but steady. "You didn't ask if it was important. You didn't ask if it was mine. You didn't ask if I was okay. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. And now everyone knows what you did." You could hear a pin drop. The trial lasted 7 days, but the verdict took only 3 hours. Guilty. Gregory Lawson. Criminal negligence and reckless endangerment. 3 HOA board members. Conspiracy to obstruct medical access and administrative misconduct. Maximum penalties recommended. Claire cried for the first time in weeks, but not out of pain, out of something else. Release. It wasn't over. Logan's heart would never be the same, neither would hers. But now, for the first time since that morning, she knew the world had finally seen the truth. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Gregory Lawson sat stone-faced as the words echoed. Count after count. Criminal negligence, reckless endangerment, obstruction. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Claire didn't cry. She didn't move. She just listened. For the first time, the system said what she'd known all along. They were wrong. The judge's voice was calm but final. 6 years in state prison. Willow Ridge HOA dissolved. $2.4 million in damages to the Sanders family. No cheers, no clapping, just quiet justice. When Claire got home, Logan was waiting, pale, thin, healing. She knelt beside him. "They said it," she whispered. "They said it was wrong." He smiled faintly. Finally. Outside the courthouse, someone had written in chalk, "The boy lived, the rules didn't." 1 year later, Logan walked into his school's science fair with a brand new backpack. It was black, reinforced, and embroidered with bold, white letters stitched by his mom. "My heart, my rules." He stood in front of his project, a working model of a solar-powered battery unit for wearable medical devices. His hands shook a little, but his voice was steady. "If this had existed a year ago," he said to the judges, "maybe none of this would have happened. But since it did, I want to make sure it never happens again." Claire stood near the back of the room, watching him, not hovering, just proud. He was different now, older in ways that had nothing to do with age, but alive, fully, vibrantly alive. And not because the system saved him, because he and she refused to let it end there. After the trial, Claire founded a nonprofit, Logan's Heart Foundation, providing mobile heart units, emergency response kits, and legal aid to families battling housing restrictions tied to medical needs. Within 6 months, 3 state legislatures passed the Logan Act, banning HOAs from interfering with medical devices or life support equipment in public or private spaces. Law students studied the case. Activists cited it. Claire spoke at conferences. Logan was featured in a short documentary called The Backpack That Was a Heart. But none of that mattered to him as much as the one thing his mom hung on their wall, a framed letter written in marker by Logan the day after he got home from the hospital. "Dear Mom, thanks for fighting for me. I know that was scary. Next time I promise to stay inside, but if they come again, we fight them together." In the end, justice didn't bring Logan's first heart back, but it helped build something stronger, a life that kept beating, not despite the system, but beyond it.